Lomit Patel, man, it's good to see you. How are you doing?
Doing great, man. It's good to see you, Dennis.
Yeah. We were just talking. We've known each other for a long time. So I appreciate you taking the time to chat with me. I have a few questions here to kind of like get the conversation started, and let's just kind of see wherever it goes.
Yeah, let's do it.
Yeah, cool. So maybe like I know you, but tell me a little bit about you and your background.
My name's Lomit. Currently the Chief Growth Officer at Tinker, which is a leading ed tech platform where we empower kids to learn to code and AI through gamification. I've been in the industry for over 20 years. I've led growth and marketing in a number of different high growth startups across consumer tech, social, and education at companies like Roku, IMVU, and now Tinker. And I've also written a book called Lean AI, which was part of the Eric Ries, the Lean Startup series, which really focused on how you can leverage AI and automation to scale growth.
Yeah, I remember. I remember when you released it. And
Yeah.
I remember when you were working on it. Actually, I think you had shared parts of it with me at the time for some of my.
Yeah. And I think you really helped me out on one of the chapters was related to a lot of creative testing because at that time we were doing a lot of work with you guys when you were
Yeah,
back at Liftoff.
yeah, yeah. I remember that. Cool. So I mean, I know your career really kind of spans a variety of like areas as you just discussed: consumer technology, social apps, education. I'd like to understand. So that's like like what kind of foundational principles have you found stayed consistent when running growth across these different areas, and then what areas, like what parts of the playbook do you find that you've had to adapt as well?
Yeah, I would say the constants, which are sort of similar for the most part, is just having a deep understanding of your customers, right? So really honing in on the ideal customer profile, and obviously, as the product evolves, that's going to evolve over time. The other part is really just having the mindset of doing a lot of rapid experimentation, because for the most part, you have to continue to keep test, learn, and iterate, and most importantly, being data informed in terms of how you make those decisions. So, just not really just completely relying on gut, but really using data to be your guide. Regardless of the companies that I worked, things that generally change outside of that. I mean, it's all about really understanding the user journey from how people are coming in from the top, how they engage in the mid funnel, and how they're being retained at the bottom funnel. Those things are pretty consistent, but it really comes down to really figuring out like how much friction do you want to keep in that process and how much friction do you want to remove, right? And that varies depending on what type of business it is. But but beyond the user journey, the things that tend to change for the most part, depending on which companies that I worked, it's really the channels and the platforms and the messaging, right? Because with different audiences, there's going to be different channels that are going to work better. For example, in gaming, there was a lot of paid UA, so it was right across the board, including DSPs. But in education, for the most part, it's really you don't tend to have those bigger UA budgets. So it's more around content, SEO, and app store optimization. So more about organic and product-led growth initiatives.
Yeah. Yeah, that makes sense. Totally. Yeah, I think that the approach is, from what I've seen, I think there's a pretty consistent playbook that's being applied. And then to your point, it's like channels will be different. I mean, go back to like again, like the ideal user profile and kind of build off of that. I think is a starting point.
Yeah, and I think one of the other things, really in depending on which bent you come from, marketers generally come from either the performance or the brand inside, right? And what you come to realize as you tend to be, in marketing long enough, that there has to be a balance between both. It's not really about one being better than the other. It's about how they can coexist. And the more that I've come to sort of appreciate it now, especially because it's so much harder to do really good attribution, with a lot of signal loss on the iOS and cookie deprecation on browsers, is that ultimately the brand becomes your moat. If you can really focus on building a really compelling brand that people trust, that's what really differentiates people. And that ultimately helps create a consistent number of people coming into the top of the funnel, or else the top of the funnel will end up drying up if you're just going to completely focus on performance, because then you're really focusing on people that is a much smaller well to really go and acquire those users long term.
Let me ask you another question. So I know that at IMVU, you had a lot of success. Your team generated very significant ROI. You're spending millions of dollars on UA. So again, kind of like, where were some of the, like, tell me a little bit about like what some of the process, like what were some of the structural or process level decisions that you made to help ensure consistency and scale?
Yeah, I mean, what I would say is not just at IMVU, but other companies, everybody wants to see scale, right? But the reality is, to scale anything, you first got to have the ground rules in place in terms of what defines success. So what are the KPIs that not only matter to the team, but really matter to the company? So, how does it ladder up into what the company's really going to look at for success? And for the most part, the companies that I've been part of, it's always about revenue and paying users, right? So using that as the foundation, then it's really about getting analytical to really figure out, what are the inputs that are really going to be influencing to get to those outputs, and what are the right KPI signals to look at, and they're going to be different based on different stages of the funnel, but at a high level, I've been fortunate to be part of companies where the budget has generally been fluid, and it's more about, hey, if you can hit this goal and you can hit it at this CAC, then let's keep putting more fuel on the fire, so to speak. And so I would say, in terms of like scaling, just coming to to an understanding with the powers to be, whether it's CFO or CEO, in terms of how to define success and what are the metrics. Generally it's CAC and LTV at companies where I've been. So, really looking to maintaining a strong ratio of LTV to CAC, right? And looking at that on a cohorted basis across the board. So that, the level of quality that consistently comes into the business is being maintained at a certain ratio. The second thing, especially if you're doing paid user acquisition, the other question that I've always been asked and always looked at is the payback periods, right? How long does it take us to recoup back the investment that's been made to acquire these users? And so, that's another signal. And what I would say, and what I've found, especially with the challenges now with attribution and signal loss and all that, you have to create a dynamic and fluid model around how do you measure lifetime value. And that changes based on different businesses and different seasonality and different channels. And, what's happening on an external macro environment as well. Like, for example, with tariffs and all this other stuff that's impacting people and their willingness to pay and buy stuff. So, so doing that before, when I started, we used to have teams sort of building these models, and we would reevaluate it every quarter. I don't think that's good enough anymore. But now with AI, you can build machine learning models around this, and you can start looking at it more frequently, whether it's monthly or even weekly or bi-weekly. And I think that's important. So that way you can have more confidence in terms of your payback periods and your LTVs and how your CACs are looking. And then, the third signal is really, instead of trying to go too broad too quickly, it's always about, how deep can you go in each channel until you hit that point of saturation, and how do you define that point of saturation, whether that's when those KPIs start getting, inefficient. And that's when you start, identifying different channels that you want to diversify and test. So, a good rule of thumb has always been to sort of put 20% of your budget into testing new things and 80% into the core channels, which are working.
Yeah, those are really good points. Let me ask you another question. So I understand that Tinker's growth comes from both consumer channels as well as institutional channels. So How do you approach building a growth strategy when your product has multiple personas and purchase cycles? Parents, educators, kids.
I would say, it all starts with segmentation and messaging. And for Tinker, we pretty much, target three different sort of personas of users. We have parents, we have educators, and we have kids. And so for parents, it's really about emphasizing, the things that really matter to them, which is about, giving their kids the skills and the mindset to be able to be successful in the future of work. And for educators, it's really about emphasizing how the product really aligns with the curriculum standards of the different states where they teach the, STEM and coding, and giving them that reassurance. And for kids, for the most part, they don't care about that stuff. They want things to be fun. And so, it's really about emphasizing the gamified approach of how learning to code can be fun. And that's where, one of the things that we've been able to build our moat around since I've been here for almost 3 years was to hone in about, what could we piggyback off that kids love that has a huge total addressable market and could become a great gateway to get kids to discover Tinker. That, believe it or not, is Minecraft. Coming from the gaming world, Minecraft is huge, and they have over 200 million active users around the world. And so that was the wave we caught on to build these creator tools coming from the gaming world. I knew about creators and influencers, but we wanted to leverage building our own creator tools for kids to help them become influencers in Minecraft, because we know that was a strong motivation. Kids love to build stuff and to share it with other kids in a community like Minecraft. So that's what we ended up doing, and that has become the flywheel where kids, instead of focusing on parents, we really focus on kids first on the consumer side, and kids end up, building all of these cool things, and then they have to create an account. So we remove all the friction now. So they get into the play box, start creating, and then they have to save the projects. That's when they create the account, and that's when we ask them for their parents' email, and that's led us to building a database of millions of parent emails at a fraction of the cost it was costing to actually target parents and get them to create accounts first, and then get the kid and add their kids into the product. So that has worked, and it's led to more viral growth, because now kids are creating projects, sharing it across social media, and other kids are discovering all of these projects on YouTube and TikTok, and that just leads to a flywheel where user-generated content ends up becoming the feeder, where on the paid side, we don't really have to focus on the content. We just have to amplify that content.
That's brilliant, man. That's actually so smart. Like, it's basically like taking a product, it's like a product-led growth strategy.
Yeah.
Certainly from my experience in the past, talking to friends and marketers who are working on marketing kids apps, this is the first time I've heard this. Is typically I'm running UA, I'm targeting the parents, I'm trying to get the parents interested to create accounts on behalf of their kids and so on. I also want to target kids through user acquisition, through UA campaigns, and then you got some privacy challenges around that. And what you're doing is just make it available to kids to start building for Minecraft, which is like an ultra popular platform still. And then as they get in there, start playing around, which is off of something that they're motivated by, they then need their parent to go create the account for them so they can start publishing and sharing with friends and so on. Brilliant.
Yeah. And so what I would say is, and I know you've done this too, but as marketers, you have to kind of step back from what everybody else is doing and think of, a different mousetrap, so to speak. Because when I came into this job, they were doing the same thing. And the biggest complaint from the investors and the founders was high CAC. Doing the same thing and expecting a different result wasn't really going to get us there. So the question was, what was the root causes of the high CAC? It's really targeting parents, and parents are the most expensive audience to go after because they have the least user attention. And everybody's trying to target parents because they fall into that group where you're competing with so many other products that have higher LTVs that will outbid you to get to those users, right? And so, that's where, I came up with the idea, like, what can we piggyback off that would naturally just appeal to kids? Because it's hard to target kids anyway, and have them come to us versus us needing to go to them. And so, this has been great. And it actually has created a playbook where we're hoping to replicate with Roblox now as well,
I
which
was going to
hasn't.
ask, how about
Yeah.
Roblox? It's
Yeah.
another giant
It's a
platform.
giant platform. And so,
Yeah.
I think it always makes it easier. Like once you prove something like
Well,
a case study or use case here, and then taking it and pitching that to Roblox. Because I mean, for the most part, Roblox has a huge community, but they have the same challenges too, which is they want to continue to try and get more people to stay engaged on their platform. And what I found, working at IMBU, which was, we created a competitive product similar to Roblox. The biggest challenge internally is building the right creator tools, because you've got so many conflicting priorities going on, and depending on where the company's focused, whether it's on monetization or engagement or the community. But generally, creator tools, get deprioritized. And that's where I found the same thing when I reached out and spoke to Minecraft. And they were really open to like having someone come in and help them with that. And I'm sure Roblox might be open to that too.
well, let me just ask like one more question. There's a few here. So can you share with me, like, what's one thing most growth teams from your experience often or still get wrong when it comes to retention marketing?
I would say, and it's taken me a while to get to this conclusion, but my conclusion is, I mean, for the most part, even when you manage full funnel, in a growth team, generally retention falls under CRM. And, I feel, that's the biggest mistake, because what happens is, it becomes somebody else's problem to deal with. But the best way to deal with retention is to have a product-led initiative, because ultimately it's the product that people are coming for. And so what I found that worked really at IMBU and have replicated at Tinker is really trying to come up with, like retention starts from day 0. It's not day 30 or whatever. And by day 0, it's really what's the first time user experience. And you want to try to get the user to experience that aha moment of what the wow is about the product as quickly as possible, so that they see value. And then you want to create a repeatable and scalable process so they continue to build and see that value within, at least consistently within the first 7 days. And if you do that, and where people see and fall in love with the product within the first 7 days, then the retention rate is going to be so much better than if you try to like just, have somebody come in and then you have the product team working separately on trying to create the onboarding experience. And then you have CRM just blasting them with emails and messages. I mean, it just has to be an integrated experience, but the priority really starts and ends with the product and the experience. And if people start using the product and start seeing that value, then, you don't need to worry about the CRM. The CRM is there to support and guide them, but it shouldn't be the one that's responsible for retaining customers.
Yeah, that's a great point. Totally agree. Yes, seen plenty of that. Yeah, totally. Cool. Well, we'll kind of leave it at that. Listen, I thank you for joining and spending some time with me and sharing some of your insights. It's great to connect. As a kind of like to wrap things up, is there anything that you got going on that you'd want to share? Are you working on a new book or anything you want to tell us about?
Yeah, I mean, first of all, thanks for having me, Dennis. It's been great to reconnect and chat. What I would say is, and I know you and I talked about this earlier, but my book kind of came out at the wrong time, so to speak, in 2020. But it's ironic now that the book's really started to pick up again. And so, and I feel like, with more and more people that are really getting interested in about AI and automation and how to, either leverage that, in their companies or how to build a culture around that, that, has really sort of led to, a lot more interest in the book. And so, I would just love to kind of put it out there. The book I had wrote called Lean AI, if there's anyone that's really thinking about it, especially not just from a marketing, because ultimately to successfully implement AI, it really comes down to making a cultural shift and really rethinking how the company's going to approach it. And so in that book, there's a lot of information. It's not just about how to implement it from a marketing perspective, but how to implement it from a cultural and strategic standpoint. And so just love to put it out there that it's definitely starting to get more popular again.
Yeah, it's funny. Yes, it exploded. So cool. Yeah, Lean AI is your book. Again, thanks for sharing, and we'll talk soon.